Hello, thank you so much for clicking this video today. I really appreciate it. I've got a really exciting one for you guys today. I'm here with the president of the Midnight Foundation, Fahmi. How are you doing today?
Hey, Peyton, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. I hope you're well too.
Yeah, I am doing well, especially, being able to record this podcast. And, we have the Glacier Airdrop coming soon. That's, eligible. Over 38 million wallets are eligible. And I really like the design behind the airdrop and the design behind the tokenomics. Essentially, you're going to have 60 days to claim. And then after that, people have to keep coming back and, kind of using Cardano over and over again. I think it's going to be a great introduction to the Midnight blockchain, but we're going to get into all of that. For viewers watching, this podcast is going to be an introduction to Fahmi here. What is Midnight? Really an informative podcast. So make sure you stay tuned. To get started, can you share your journey to becoming the president of the Midnight Foundations? What experiences in fintech and blockchain led you to, champion rational privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and a great question. So, I spent 20 plus years in the financial world. I was very fortunate, spent 17 years of those at a firm called Marshall Wace, which grew exponentially. And there I was very fortunate to work with some very high caliber quants, quant developers, and software developers, all about how you make everything flow more smoothly. How do you use technology to make life easier? And then through that transition, I helped launch a spin out for a Citadel, a large American hedge fund. And I realized I kind of stopped learning. I'd always been a place that I wanted to keep continuing to learn, to develop. And I was approached by Parity, the builders of Polkadot, to look into potentially becoming their CFO and helping them on their journey. And at first, I was unsure. But the more I read into Gavin Wood and what blockchain does, I saw how it could unlock the fabric or change the fabric of how business was done and how society works. We got to a world where everything was very centralized and very much in the hands of a few powerful people. So it's about how do you give back technology into the hands of individuals for them to sort of regain that power, to own sort of their pathway in the world. So I spent 18 months working closely with Gavin and his engineers and the Parity team, dived down that rabbit hole and learned a lot. And I'm grateful to that experience. And then Charles came calling, Charles Hoskinson, and he said, "Hey, Fahmi, I hear good things about you. I'm working on a project called Midnight. Would you be interested in coming to work with me?" And when I looked at what Midnight was and what Charles was trying to achieve with the mission and his vision, I was like, this is the key that unlocks the future. Because what we realize, and what everybody I think has to realize, is for all the power and benefits that Bitcoin gave us and decentralized gave us, that has then been taken forward through Ethereum and then Cardano, Solana, and others, we all accepted transparency as an acceptable sort of premise of blockchain and gave up our rights to confidentiality, to privacy. And we think that's the vision and the key that unlocks real world adoption around blockchain technology, to get the large corporates involved, to move beyond such a simple fads that we see now and then. So look, I've been here on the project for 18 months, and Charles and the team asked me to become president of the foundation and take that growth and that vision forward. And I was very honored, and I have a big sense of responsibility in terms of taking that forward, not only to the team at the foundation, but also the builders, to Charles, and also the Cardano ecosystem and beyond. We really want to see real adoption of blockchain, and we are hoping Midnight, and we do believe Midnight is the key to that future.
Yeah, I kind of the tagline, the fourth generation blockchain, it kind of surprised me at first, but the more I kind of looked into Midnight and saw what it offers, privacy, I think it's something that everybody needs. If you're doing business with another party, you don't want them to know how much you have on your balance sheet, for example, because they may charge you higher, or they may, realize they don't even want to work with you. And looking at, Monero, for example, a lot of nation states have kind of gone after Monero, whereas this idea of, rational privacy, where, it's private, unless you don't want it to be, I think is kind of the perfect balance between these two things. It allows us to kind of, operate in the business world with transparency when it's needed, but also to, not have everything be out there and in the public. So I really like that. Um, you know,
Yeah,
the
look, so
the
it's sorry to cut you off, but it's a really important concept. Confidence comes from being able to share information confidentially. So it's not just about financial rails. I know we spoke about financial rails, and my background is in that space. But think about your conversation with your physician, your healthcare advisor.
yeah.
That should be between you and them. Maybe then selectively disclosed to other people within the clinic that can help with your diagnosis and prognosis. But ultimately, you don't want that information out there beyond that. And the same applies to blockchain, whether it's medical data, financial data, supply chain, voting, for example. You want to be able to do that with confidence, and confidence comes from confidentiality, but also it builds trust. And that's what we're looking for, is that concept of rational privacy to not only bring the truth back to blockchain, but also trust back into blockchains.
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, the U.S. government announced, kind of this move of healthcare from paperwork to it, digitizing it all, and the what I've seen when it comes to databases is if it's not a decentralized blockchain, a lot of these databases are hacked and the data is leaked. Social security numbers are leaked all of the time in the states. Private information about people is leaked everywhere. So when I hear the government talk about moving towards, digitizing everyone's health records as a standard, it kind of worries me a bit, unless you're using a technology like Midnight that kind of has, ZK proofs to hide some of that information. Did you see that announcement? What are your kind of first thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a great leap forward. I think, look, whether it's
Yeah.
healthcare data and digitizing that, voting data, social security data, look, the reality is a lot of our lives, a lot of our personal information, the PII, is controlled by third parties. They decide how we do things. And often you hear people saying the government has become too big and governments dictate too much and governments need to reduce their costs. Government need to decentralize to get more power into the hands of local governments or even individuals. Now, if you think about the same, it applies to corporates. When you upload a photo onto a photo sharing website or a social media website, when you update personal information, healthcare information with your insurance firm, all of that information is centralized and owned by somebody else. You lose the right to that information. You might have some rights to see it, to ask about it, but the actual ownership of that data, the monetization of that data belongs to somebody else now. So often the individual misses out. And if you think about hacks and this centralization, it's like giving all access to everybody and leaving your front door open, or trusting one person to keep an eye on that front door. And the problem is, if they fall asleep while you're out, that front door is open and all your data is accessed. We've heard about PII data hacks at software companies, even likes of Coinbase, who are in this space. They're centralized actors in a decentralized space. So with ZK proofs, with the advancement of technologies, we need regulations to keep in line, but the idea is to give the data back to people so they get to selectively choose when they use it, how they use it, and also how they monetize it.
Yeah, and one thing that really excites me about this technology is what I've noticed is, it takes a lot of time for, normal people to catch up with where technology's at, and they don't realize how important privacy is. So if, technology gets out there that does protect people's privacy, it's almost like they don't even have to worry about it. They don't have to have that bad thing happen to them for them to realize, how important privacy really is. So I hope to see, kind of technology like this to be more prevalent in society, because, keeping your data private is really one of the most important things in today's time, because there's not always good people out there. So, the Midnight Foundation is described as an independent organization focused on community driven growth. What role does it play in the Midnight ecosystem, and how does it differ from traditional blockchain foundations?
Yeah, so the foundation has been recently formed. Our focus is very much about the stewardship of the Midnight Network, the community. Look, ultimately, we're working very closely with Shielded Technologies, the engineering firm helping develop the Midnight Network. But the vision and the concept of growing the community and gaining adoption sits very much with the foundation. So that is partnership engagements, developer engagements, community engagements, and a little bit like our tokenomics and how we looked at the airdrop and the glacier drop. We're looking at how things have been done well and when things have not been done so well. And we're trying to, rather than reinvent the wheel, harness great community activation. I think Solana is a great example of great community activation. So there are things we can learn from that ecosystem. And equally, they're part of the airdrop, part of the ecosystem that we're inviting in. So we hope to collaborate with them in the future. But again, we're looking at where foundations have gone wrong before, where relationships have broken down before, and how we ensure that we put a robust but very fluid system in place that allows us to grow and nurture that community, to listen to the community. I don't want to be a centralized party where Fahmi gets to decide what we do. I'm very much a believer of we hire good people, we hire engaged good communities, good developers, and it's our job to listen. Most of the communication, and everybody talks about, we get on these podcasts and everybody wants to hear me speak, but the most important part of communication is to listen. So I want to be a foundation that listens to what the community wants, what the developer wants, what our partners are asking for. How do we build a network that supports that growth? How do we engage people and ensure that although we encourage big world adoption, corporate adoption, we're not leaving behind the developers, the entrepreneurs that help ignite blockchains like Midnight.
Hello, I know you're enjoying this podcast with Fahmi, but give me just 1 second. Last week, we launched Atrium.io. Atrium.io is Cardano's SocialFi ecosystem, and it's geared towards new users and businesses on Cardano. Right now, you can use our education portal, you can check out the dashboard, and you can mint an Atrium profile. On August 13th, we're going to be launching the first staking basket, Diffusion, that delegates to over 50 different stake pools on Cardano. You get ATMA tokens on top of your ADA rewards for supporting 50 small businesses on Cardano. And we have a really strong rollout plan over the next few months. Join the Discord if you want to support the channel. Use Atrium.io, mint a profile, and another way to support the channel is just by staking to Bloom. So let's get back into this great podcast with Fahmi. Yeah, one thing that's exciting is, in the same way when, Ethereum launched or Cardano launched, it opens up a lot of new business models for entrepreneurs. And I get the same feeling here with Midnight. It's almost like there's a whole new world of opportunity for, DeFi features or even, for stable coins because of that privacy aspect. So, at least on the inside of the foundation or even on the Shielded team or other people you've worked with, what are kind of some early ideas that you've had as far as, pushing Midnight's technology in a unique way that, couldn't be possible on any other blockchain?
Yeah, so I think both our technology and our tokenomics enable some of the concepts and ideas that we are sort of working with partners on. So if we think about the medical data example, so right now we have a medical clinic, healthcare firm in Turkey who have 3 million patients. And what they've done with Midnight in the testnet is to bring proof of their client patient data onto the network, where they can then easily transfer clinical data from one hospital to another. And that's without exposing confidential data on the chain. But then if you think about that conceptually, the next stage of that evolution is to open up some of that clinical proof to pharmaceutical companies to enable them to confidentially come in and research that data. So they may look for patients with diabetes and what drugs they're using and what is the outcome of those that clinician's sort of use cases. And then if that happens, they can monetize that. So now the healthcare firm has a way to increase revenue. Now they may choose to take all of that revenue, or they may take that new revenue and also use it to reduce the fees, insurance costs for their patients. If their insurance costs become persistently cheap, but for the same value of clinical sort of medical assistance, then they may attract newer patients and more patients. So the data confidentiality, the data querying around what Midnight offers allows them to both increase revenue and reduce costs for their patients, their clients, and therefore grow and increase patience. So that's a very exciting opportunity set. But coming back to stablecoins, which is the sort of the theme very much of the moment, especially with the Genius Act in the US, Midnight could enable the first compliant private stablecoin, where a stablecoin is issued publicly on Midnight, so its characteristics and properties are seen, but then it could be held privately by the underlying individuals. Now, what that enables, and I was speaking to a person who's involved in gaming, an e-game and esports, is now you can get to paying people their salaries using stablecoins on Midnight, privately and confidentiality. So, from our point of view, Midnight is not building the private blockchain; it's enabling privacy capabilities within smart contracts. So it's up to the stablecoin provider to create a compliant stablecoin. But the nice thing about that solution and with our smart contract technology is you can also create different pools of the same stablecoin. So you can have gated versions where identity gates you into that stablecoin. So you could have the same stablecoin, similar properties, but one for US only individuals and one for the rest of the world. So you don't get cross-contamination. You can have one for retail and one for corporates, high net worth. So you can actually start splitting out and categorizing the same product for different audiences whilst they're remaining confidential. So that's some exciting opportunities that we're exploring with partners, but there's more. We have up to 70 partners right now in our testnet, playing around, exploring, people helping us build on the network, helping with dev tooling, but even exciting things like institutional custodians. When I first came to the Midnight Project, what excited me was working alongside Cardano and what the Cardano network could do to bolster and launch the Midnight Network. What surprised me, though, was that there's very little support from large digital custodians. BitGo, Fireblocks, Copper, Zodi, and the likes support ADA, but not Cardano native assets. So some of the work we've done at Midnight, working with those partners, is not only to bring the Glacier Drop claim to those platforms, but to open the door for wider acceptance of other Cardano native assets. And we want to work closely with the Cardano network to help improve their visibility and liquidity into the blockchain industry.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see that. And I think we've been seeing some positive movement towards more Cardano native assets being listed on larger tier one exchanges. The Night token, it exists on both Midnight and Cardano as well, and as a CNT on Cardano, right? Or,
Yes.
CNA.
Yes, that's right. So at the beginning, so there will be 24 billion Night tokens in total that will be minted and issued. And at the beginning, all of them will be minted on Cardano. We are launching on Cardano as a Cardano native asset to ensure we have Cardano's robustness and security day one. Because often when many chains launch, they aren't that secure because of the lack of validators and sort of wider delegation. So we start immediately by leveraging that power by using Cardano's platform to integrate with large institutional custodians, large central exchanges. But Night will emit Dust, the confidential shielded resource that gives people that computational power. And Dust will emit onto the Midnight network, which is separate to Cardano. And all future Night tokens will be minted on Midnight for block rewards. So eventually liquidity will start appearing on the Midnight network. Security will start appearing and staking will appear natively on the Midnight network. But that's something we will slowly phase in to ensure first we build a very strong, robust network, delivering purpose and use cases to builders and to users, and then slowly add on all the other features. I think we want to walk first before we run, but we want to get there in the right way and help everybody sort of gain access to Midnight and its special capabilities.
Yeah, the token model is very unique and it's very future thinking. I mean, if you look at layer one blockchains now, a lot of people are buying these assets and they're holding the assets. So there's almost, a disincentive to using the blockchain because you're spending the thing that you invested in to use the blockchain. Whereas with, my understanding of the Midnight blockchain, you have the Night token, you're earning dust from the Night token, and then the dust is, decaying, right? So you almost have an incentive to use the blockchain, whereas you're not using the actual asset that you may have purchased, right? So you're
Yeah.
almost incentivized to use the blockchain instead of being disincentivized.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, so as we built the technology, we've also looked at how tokenomics work. In the real world, outside of blockchain, you may own an Apple phone, an iPhone. You may own a Samsung phone, Android phone. But you don't use Apple shares to buy an iPhone. You don't use Samsung shares to buy the Samsung Android phone. You
Yeah.
don't shop at Walmart using your Walmart shares. There's a difference between capital and assets and utility. Utility comes from using fiat. Fiat dollars give you utility to go and buy something. But you invest that utility dollars into an asset and you want to see the asset growth. Since Ethereum and other chains have come along, including Cardano, the very asset you want to go up in value, as you mentioned, is the very asset you cannibalize to pay for transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So as the price of that asset goes up, you see networks grind to a halt. Because in dollar terms, ultimately we all work in dollars. Nobody's fully enclosed within the blockchain industry or a blockchain. People, that becomes a deterrent. It becomes more and more expensive. It also doesn't help large corporate adoption. Because ultimately, if you're, or even an individual, how do you predict the cost? How much do you need to set aside for the transactions you're going to process? That's why we've seen in Ethereum the advent of L2s, but even the L2s have copied the same model. They just make it slightly cheaper and more scalable than Ethereum. So that's one of the things that we did, was to split the asset component, the ownership component, the governance component, Night, to the utility, Dust. But the reason we make Dust resort decay comes back to your point around privacy chains and Monero and other tokens. In other tokens, Monero, Zcash, and others, they introduced, the concept of privacy on chain and confidentiality, but there's no way to disclose information or ways to identify. And that, as you mentioned, creates problems for regulators and others. In Midnight, the Dust resource is a computational resource that decays. So you use it or you lose it. It gets renewed. So as long as you own Night, you'll get renewable Dust resource. But because it's shielded and it decays, what it allows is confidential compute, confidential privacy enabling solutions, but Dust itself does not have a store of value. I can't transmit value to you using Dust. I can only lease it to you for you to execute another function. And therefore, we build something that not only encourages utilization, but we also believe is compliant for when regulators come and look at the use case. We're not a private chain. Dust is a privacy enabling resource. So the builders, the corporates, the users decide on how much confidentiality or disclosures they want to provide.
So what would that leasing look like, for a normal user? Is this something that's kind of more business focused? Users that have a lot of Night are going to be, leasing it, or is this kind of for everybody? And what does that look like? Are they just going to be clicking a button in their wallet saying, I'm not using this Dust, I'm going to lease it? How would that system look like?
Yeah, so I think it has many forms. And again, these are processes that are currently in development
Okay.
and will evolve. And we'll see the community want to evolve these. So very simple
Hmm.
concept is the dust that releases or is emitted and accrues is attached to your Night. So depending on how much Night you have will determine how much dust you will emit and accrue. Now, ultimately, you may be in a self-custody wallet or a custodial wallet. Now, in the custodial wallet, I would expect custodians, the likes of BitGo and others, will help you lease that. And when you lease it, what it means is that rather than send it to your Dust wallet, you could decide to send it to somebody else's Dust. So, Peyton, if you are holder of Night and you are collecting Dust, and I come to you and say, hey, Peyton, I need some Dust. Here's my address. Can you divert your Dust to my wallet? And that's a choice you have. Now, if we are like-minded in that, we may have a commercial agreement. We might put an OTC, a legal agreement in place. In time, I imagine custodians may facilitate that. Eventually, you'll see that appear on the blockchain as a capacity exchange, which we mentioned in the tokenomics paper, where you can come to lease that capacity to others. So it shouldn't just be for the large corporates or the large holders. individuals should be able to participate. But what it means is it gives optionality for the builders. So if you're as a developer, you calculate, I want to average this many transactions a month or this many transactions a week. You can calculate how much night you need to emit enough dust to commit your transactions. But what happens when there's seasonality? We know this, like you're selling ice creams on a chain. Let's assume we're selling, we know that ice cream sales in summer go up compared to November, December. So you'll need more dust to sell more ice cream in the summer. Well, do you for that 1 or 2 months buy more night? Maybe. But what then do you do after 2 months? Sell the night? And what happens to the price of night in the 2 months? There's no guarantee the price of night will be the same, go up or go down. So your business is selling ice creams, not taking a view on the price of night. So do you want to take that volatility risk? Or do you find a partner, somebody who will lease you the capacity for those 2 months? So you're only buying the capacity you need, not an asset with volatility. And that's the problem that many other blockchains have. When you're in Solana and you want to come and work in Cardano or vice versa, you need to buy the other token. And all you want is transaction capacity in the other chain. So Midnight, by building this tokenomics, one, encourages utility, two, also gives a new model for transactions as a service, privacy enabling transactions as a service. So whether you're building natively or a hybrid solution for another chain, you don't have to take a risk in holding additional night for a short period of time.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting idea, and I think it's going to allow platforms almost to offer, a lot lower fees if they're willing to kind of lease that for a while to adopt new users. That seems like where our industry is going. They kind of want to make transactions cheaper for people, so they'll try out, new innovative ideas. The Glacier airdrop is, allocating 50% of the 24 billion night tokens to ADA holders, and then the rest to different, I think 7 different blockchain ecosystems.
Right, yeah.
After that, there's this scavenger mine and lost and found. What does that process look like for, an average user? And then, how does this model kind of incentivize long-term participation?
Yeah, look, great question. So yeah, look, we are dropping 24 billion night tokens, the 100% of the supply very soon. So keep listening. Watch out for posts on the network and the foundation's websites and social media platforms. So with 50% will go to ADA holders. Again, recognizing the support that Cardano is providing and launching us and the Midnight Network. And the rest is to 7 different ecosystems: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, BNB Chain, XRP, and the BATS, the Brave browser network. They have 60 days to come and claim. There's no first come, first serve. Your claim is locked in. So you can come day 1, day 60. Your claim is guaranteed. You just have to prove that you are the owner of the eligible address and then provide a new Cardano address to which the claim will be delivered. But then after that, recognizing that there might be interest beyond, or actually people might want more night, there's a 30-day window, as you rightly point out, called the scavenger hunt. Think of it like a proof of mind, a puzzle exercise somebody has to come and solve to come and claim anything that is unclaimed. So let's assume Satoshi's wallet is not claimed. It's very unlikely Satoshi will claim the night eligible for his Bitcoin wallet. He's not done anything since almost day 1 of Bitcoin's launch. So somebody can theoretically come and claim Satoshi's address and wallet and his eligible night tokens by solving a puzzle. But ultimately, they're not really entitled to that. They're claiming somebody else's entitlement. So in doing so, the scavengers, the miners, will claim a portion of that. The rest is a tax, which will actually go and build the foundation, the reserves, and the on-chain treasury. So it's the first ever post-mine. There's no pre-mine. Nobody gets an entitlement up front. There's no VCs who will get anything up front ahead of the community. And it's the community's actions, the miners' actions, that create this post-mine, that deliver tokens into the foundation. Now, clearly, I want the Glacier drop to be hugely successful. But if there's a 100% claim, and Satoshi is one of the people that comes to claim, which would be a great endorsement of Midnight, there'll be nothing left for the foundation. So we would have succeeded in not having the biggest airdrop, but the foundation itself won't have much longevity unless we garner some external investments. So we want a strong claim. We want a strong mining process for the scavenger hunt, which will then seed the foundation. And we're hopeful that through not only our vision, but the way we're doing this and the fairness and the radical approach and transparency we're bringing to such a drop, that we'll get strong attention, but also get strong seeding of the foundation.
Awesome. You mentioned in that you mentioned reserves, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot of stake pool operators on Cardano, and this partner chain model. There's always kind of been a mention of kind of rewards coming in from these partner blockchains, and from my understanding, SPOs that kind of run the Midnight node on top of their stake pool will start to receive night tokens. Do the delegates that are supporting that stake pool already on Cardano, do they get a portion of night tokens as well from those reserves?
Yes. So as part of the work and as part of the support from Cardano, ADA holders can delegate as they currently do, delegate their ADA to SPOs, who then validate and keep the Cardano network up. Going forward, those same SPOs, the ADA delegates, can also nominate to not only support Cardano, but also Midnight block production. So as part of your ADA delegation, those SPOs will be receiving both ADA rewards and night rewards. And ultimately, it's up to those SPOs to pass through those rewards to the ADA delegators. So yes, is the short answer, and there's work going on. So when the Midnight Network launches, it'll be launched initially as a federated set of nodes and operators to ensure, because of the complexity of what we're doing, a very robust and stable launch. And then we'll migrate and phase in ADA delegation through SPOs to support both Cardano and Midnight. So night reward will be extra incentive for those SPOs.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really exciting. The rewards, just over time as the reserves deplete, node operators and delegates are getting paid less and less. So seeing, initiatives like this, I think is, going to be exciting for a lot of people. Looking ahead, how do you see Midnight evolving over the next 5 years?
Yes. Oh, 5 years is a long time in blockchain.
It is.
So yes, look, for me, what I care about and why I'm here is adoption. Look, I can get into grand words like legacy, but ultimately we got to start slowly. And the first thing is start with a claim. Make people to understand what we're doing and why we're doing things differently at Midnight. Why do we have an airdrop in the way we do? Why do we have a tokenomics design in the way we do? We want cooperative tokenomics. We want people to use the network, not only Cardano users or Midnight users, but users from other chains, Solana, Ethereum. If you think about traditional technology, it's built with multiple technology stacks are not one single design. There are multiple designs from a number of different components and providers. And ultimately, we see that happening in the blockchain, where people take the best of Solana, the best of Ethereum, the best of Cardano, and bring that together on Midnight. If we're achieving that, when Midnight becomes the connective tissue, a meta chain, enabling confidentiality, privacy enabling solutions that extend into other chains, as well as in the Midnight chain, if we can get to a place where large corporates look at Midnight as the blockchain they want to use to keep their data confidential, healthcare companies, individuals think about that as a place where they're comfortable holding proof of their identity, proof of their vote, proof of their healthcare, then that is success. And there's a long way to go to achieve that. But I do genuinely believe in the technology and what we've been doing, what we've been building. And I believe as we open that up and we open source the technology, we invite the community in, the developers in, the users in, and we learn from them and we listen to them and we align on that vision. I do believe that's very, very achievable. So in 5 years, if I'm still sat in this seat, it would mean that I've done something right, first and foremost. I've been listening, and that the Midnight Network is somewhere along the lines, if not completely along the lines, of achieving that vision.
Awesome. I really think that this has been a great introduction to the Midnight Foundation, yourself, and Midnight so far. Is there anything that we didn't cover so far in this interview that you kind of want to get out there before we close out?
Yeah, look, I just want to highlight to everyone, look, why are we all in the blockchain space? We're all innovators, we're pioneers, we're entrepreneurs. We're here because we believe when Bitcoin was launched and then Ethereum, Cardano, and others, that there was more than centralized actors. But if you look at the blockchains of today, it's very much controlled by centralized actors who collect your data, whether it's DeFi, whether it's central exchanges and others. In many ways, we've moved away from the core ethos of what I think Satoshi and the Bitcoin papers sort of wanted to establish. So I want to go back to that vision. I want to go back to that vision of decentralized technology, changing the fabric of society, changing how ownership works, intermediation works, and how businesses and individuals interact. And I would hope that people see that and align to that with what we're trying to do at Midnight. See that privacy is a fundamental right. Privacy enables confidentiality, and confidentiality gives confidence, and confidence gives trust. And if we follow that chain through, then I would hope that Midnight is delivering. So I would ask people, why? Why are you here? Why are you in the blockchain space? It's got to be more than trying to get an extra bit of yield through the next DeFi play or following the next meme trend. And if we want more and more people to use it, we're just at the tip of the iceberg today. Technology today and the blockchain industry is at the tip of the iceberg. We're seeing regulations, particularly in the US, changing to see wider adoption. And I mentioned at an event not too long ago in New York, I think, Peyton, you were there, that the institutional wave is coming. The big institutional players will come. Some of the actions of the Genius Act actually support them more than the small player, more than the entrepreneurs who've created the blockchain industry we know today. So if we're not cooperating, if we're not building the best surfboard to ride that wave, they will wash us out. And then the chain, the vision that we all had, going back to Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, and others, will get left behind, and we'll end up in just a centralized corporate machine again. So I go back to why, and I would encourage people to come and play around with Midnight's tech. If you align with the vision and what we're trying to do, and we are different. We are radically different. You know, we're not saying we're just another copycat of what's gone before. We're trying to do things differently, and sometimes that causes people to be uncomfortable. But if you're an entrepreneur and a pioneer in blockchain, then you should be uncomfortable. You should always be on the edge of that seat trying to make change. So I'd encourage everybody to go back to the why and come and play around with Midnight, and hopefully come and claim. We're giving this away because we believe in the tech. So come and get the free claim, come and use the capacity we're giving away, and see if what we're doing, what we're enabling, realigns to that core vision that we all had not too long ago.
Incredible. Yeah, I think this is the biggest innovation that I've seen in the blockchain space in a while. You know, I like the idea of privacy, but really digging into the tokenomics myself, I'm like, oh, there's a lot here. And I think that question of why is really important. I think that I agree with you completely. I got into blockchain in 2017, and I was kind of worried about personal sovereignty and personal freedoms, and I felt that blockchain was kind of a good innovation to bring more freedoms and rights to people. And I think that this is ultimately the only way to preserve those rights and freedoms as crypto becomes more mainstream. Is you have to kind of innovate so drastically that you just have to use the innovation ultimately. But thank you so much, Fahmi, for being here, and thank you everybody for watching. And if you guys made it till the end, comment Midnight Foundation below to let us know you made it to the end. And thank you for watching, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Peyton. Appreciate it.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.